psychologist, and today we're going to talk about a concept called empathy in action. And it's a trend that we're starting to see that companies are going through. And it's really about moving from being company centric to employee and customer centricity. I know that seems uh, kind of silly, but in truth, and we'll kind of look at a historical perspective about how companies have treated customer experience, employee experience, the contact center. And when you see it in this context, hopefully you'll see some things that you haven't thought about before and some new ways of thinking about business. So what we see is that there's a new wave of customer employee experiences, and that's because companies are really evolving these experiences. That's really what people are looking for. They're not really looking for a product or service. They're really craving experiences. And that's because companies now need to be in the business of making connections in a ecosystem that is constantly evolving and constantly changing. Now, one of the things that we see is that customer experience and employee experience is always open, deeply personal, and inherently social, especially in particular apps like Facebook or WhatsApp. That's really where customers are, and they're communicating with each other and they're communicating with businesses there. So let's take a deeper look into why shift paradigms. Part of it is expectations have evolved. Part of it is many competitors, especially during the pandemic, have evolved. It's really forced a lot of companies to become extremely customer and employee centric and really change their business models. And the other thing that we're seeing and we're studying is looking at a lot of the paradigms around how we drive business value were based on what was good just for the company. And oftentimes, many of the principles and many of the strategies left the customer employee experience. It kind of affected them in a negative way. And what we're finding is when you really look at transforming that customer and employee experience, it actually drives better business value for the company as well. So let's look at expectations. Part of this and part of what we see is that customer demands really can't be met with the status quo. We have a couple competing things happening here. We have exploding customer expectations, so dramatic increases in interactions. Pretty much everybody's on their mobile device. People expect gratification instantly. They're on their devices 24/7. They want to be on their channel of choice, and they really have no tolerances for poor experiences. And I can't tell you the number of people that when I talk about this, they always have a story about a particular brand that they've done business with, and they're like, what was this company thinking? So it's very interesting that these are like the top things that we're seeing. And at the same time, companies are struggling with how do we meet these expectations. We were talking to a bank, and a bank was comparing themselves to like somebody like Starbucks and saying, we need to be like as agile and accessible as somebody like that. And it was a bank that's like 150 years old. So it was very interesting to see them see themselves through a different set of eyes. A lot of this inability to deliver on these experiences has to do with the increase in volume and the number of people in digital and social channels. It also has to do with channels not really being connected or having no context of what the customer's done before, so the customer has to repeat themselves, which in a short-tempered world means that they really get frustrated really easy. A lot of companies seem to be struggling with automating non-trivial tasks, and we also see increasing IT complexity. So when you're trying to deliver on a lot of different channels, you're trying to deliver these new expectations, it becomes really confusing. How do we set up our infrastructure, and how do we set up our processes and our strategy to be able to deliver on these promises? And oftentimes, what's really interesting is that who ends up suffering is the employees. So if they have a lot of systems and they're not connected, then I was just on the phone with a telecom provider here in the United States, and I could tell the agent, she kept apologizing because she was like, "Oh, my system is stuck or it's really slow." And I, being in this business, I knew basically she was having to shift between many different systems. And then what that ends up doing is really not only making your employees not so efficient, but it also uh, makes the job of the employee difficult. And so that I think that that is in part why we have such a high employee attrition rate, which ends up being very costly for most companies. The other thing I think that's probably as or more important is what's happening to competition. And so I don't know about you, but uh, it feels like the world is speeding up. And so I decided to study this a little bit. And the truth is that technology and its capabilities are accelerating at an exponential rate. And it's because we're able to build on previous inventions and innovations rather than starting from scratch. And the capabilities are growing exponentially fast. And so now we're moving from one innovation to the next much faster than ever before. So it's not just your imagination, change is actually accelerating. And I want to dive a little bit deeper into that and what that means. In the past, when we've, looked at, technologies, we've looked at business growth and the relationship, it's been a linear relationship. Um, but what's happening now is this use of exponential technologies, and those are things like AI or the cloud or IoT. And what's really interesting is there was a quote that I was reading about in a book called Bold. If you haven't read Bold by Peter Diomedes, he's the founder of X Prize. It's a very fascinating book, and he really puts all of this into great context. So I would highly, highly recommend it. And what he says is that when businesses use exponential technology, it actually offers the business the opportunity to really grow their business exponentially through time. But it's really interesting to see how this technology, these new technologies are developing. And there's really three time periods. The first time period is where there's no sense of urgency. The second time period is the point of no return, kind of where the hockey stick turns. And then the point where it's too late and it's taken off and your competitors are ahead of you. So I want to dive into this a little bit deeper and look at why it's really a competitive advantage. As I said, exponential technologies can be really deceiving at first because in the beginning, when they're first developing, it seems like nothing's happening. So, like, why should we change anything? It's, there's nothing here. But once they reach that point of no return, um, it's too late and businesses are using them. And that's really where we are today. And so it's really fascinating to me to see this transformation. The contact center world, the CRM, CX, whatever you want to call it, has been pretty steady for the last 30 to 40 years. And so we're seeing now a really big change in how technology is being developed and how companies are actually consuming that. What's happened is they've reached a level of maturity so that they make a really big difference in your business when you use them. And it means that your business growth can actually become exponential. And so as you look over the past year and you see some companies doing exponentially well and others not, part of it, the secret sauce underneath that is really these exponential technologies. So if you're using them, it's fantastic. If your competitors are using them and you're not, it can really make a difference to your business. And part of that is because they allow you to make continuous measurable improvement really fast. And there was a really interesting man, John Boyd, who was a fighter pilot and later a management strategist. And he created a process to make decisions, observe, orient, decide, and act. And initially, this process was really to make decisions in the moment during a military maneuver. But then what he and others found was that when you start to use it for business, you can start to compare an agile company to a less agile company. So in this particular diagram, the circle, it represents time. And if you look at a less agile company and the time it takes for them to go through those steps of observing what's happening, try to figure out what do they want to do, create a strategy and a plan, decide and take action, what happens is if your company takes a long time to make those kind of decisions, they can lag behind their competitors in making great customer and employee experiences. But you compare them to a company that's very agile, And what we see not only startups being able to do this, but we also see larger companies actually transforming themselves into more agile companies and making that decision time, that observe, orient, decide, and act much faster, and therefore able to respond to customer employees' expectations much faster. The other thing that's really interesting is how being more customer and employee centric drives better business values. So I want to kind of take you through a paradigm shift. So this is kind of a fun diagram. For hundreds of years, people believed that the planets and the sun revolved around the Earth. And so that was one way of looking at the world. And in our particular model, we know that that paradigm was incorrect and that the sun is actually the center of our universe. And so to make a comparison, the sun is really our employees and our customers, and now they're really the center of businesses. And this change in paradigm represents an amazing opportunity for companies that want to be customer centric. And what is also interesting, my background, I'm an engineer, so I studied a lot of technology. I have a PhD in material science and kind of an alchemist. And I love looking at patterns. And what I saw was throughout time, there have been major paradigm shifts like Galileo and Copernicus. And the status quo for these paradigms is being challenged. And so it's really requiring companies and brands and individuals to become pioneers in the employee and customer experience. And what's really driving that sense of urgency, but before you could turn a ship and it could take a long time, but what's really driving the sense of urgency is the exponential technologies that I talked about before, because the change in technology, its capabilities, what it's able to deliver, the user experience is changing at an exponential rate. So it really is kind of forcing the hand of many companies to transform that. I don't know if you've ever heard of Thomas Kuhn, a little bit more of a history here. He was a scientist who actually coined the term paradigm shift. And the shift in paradigms for customer and employee experience has really reached what's called a purification point or a boiling point. So it's kind of like if you're boiling spaghetti for dinner and you go chop up your vegetables for the salad and you turn around and you're like, oh my gosh, my pot of hot water is just boiled over. Well, that's kind of where this shift is with respect to employee and customer experiences. So just like the Earth is not really the center of our universe, the company can't be the center. It can't be the reason that we're making those decisions. And I know sometimes that seems counterintuitive, but what I want to show you is that by putting people at the center, the focus of your company, not only does it make it better for the employees and the customers, but in the long run, it's really what's going to make the difference in your bottom line. So just like in any particular model, you have normal science, then you have a model, right? And what we're finding is that employee and customer experience model is really in crisis, and really it's requiring all of us to really think how we do business, how we think about that customer and employee experience, and become revolutionaries and see it from a different set of lenses. So how can companies do this? How can they make that shift from the old definitions of efficiency and effectiveness? And oftentimes, when I've talked to companies, a lot of the decisions were based on cost cutting or cost to serve. And so that really means that we're starting to look at what is the shift in how we think about business. So we have an equation that we use. Old world customer services are really a culmination of efficiency and effectiveness. But thinking about this in a new way requires a new kind of thinking. And that's where this theory that I came up with, experience as a service, comes into play. And it's really a vision to use these exponential technologies to deliver empathetic customer and employee experiences, but be able to do it at scale. So why is it so out of date the way that we've thought before? Well, if we start to look at experiences through the lens of the customer, we want to start with a question, and we want to ask ourselves, did the customer get what they needed when they reached out to us? Perhaps we've been proactive or prescriptive. So we're really looking at a move from being reactive to proactive and prescriptive. And sometimes it's great to really surprise them without kind of the old. I think a lot of the what's happened in the MarTech world is that you talk to your sister or your brother about wanting to play tennis, and then all of a sudden on Facebook you see all these Facebook ads, and so we're not talking about being kind of that creepy kind of big brother listening, but really understanding that customer, what their wants and needs are with their permission, and being able to surprise them at times. And if you're able to do that, then that's what we call empathy in action. And I'm going to define empathy, and it's probably not what you think. It's not about a mindset. It's not about being nice. It's not about um, active listening. It's not about sympathy. It's really about getting the customer what they need, when they need it, where they need it. So if a company is still in the old paradigm, it's really difficult, if not impossible, to deliver the kind of great experiences that their competitors are delivering. So let's use a concrete example, because right now everything I've said is pretty theoretical. And let's look at a company-centric, old world efficiency and effectiveness. Let's say a bot that's not intelligent, or I call it the dumb bot, that doesn't have a lot of data or AI. And this bot could be on any channel. It could be voice bot. It could be on your IVR. It could be in a social channel or a digital channel. In the old world, a bot was seen by the company as a less expensive way to serve the customer, oftentimes a cost-cutting paradigm state. But the bot really didn't have the engagement channel history, the customer journey, the customer data, or AI to really help it deliver contextually relevant real-time experiences. And oftentimes these bots made customers frustrated because they couldn't really provide the answers or information that was really needed. And that left customers frustrated and oftentimes unloyal. Now, having been a technologist for 30 years, I'll walk you through some history about technology. At the time, this was really cool, and it was really the best that technology could do. But with the advent of exponential technologies and AI, there's so much more that we can do now. And so what I found fascinating is to be able to put this all in context, to be able to see what we can do today. The sad thing about the old technology is often customers just didn't get what they needed, and they either just left or they had to try another channel. So why isn't it why is it so out of date? Well, when you start to look at it from the old and the new paradigm, in reality, using a bot that wasn't very smart wasn't efficient for the company. Oftentimes, they had paid for technology that didn't deliver on a promise, greatly reduced call volumes, and it wasn't effective because first contact resolution wasn't one and done, because they had to actually try another channel, again, costing the company money. And if you look at from the customer's point of view, it really wasn't effective for them because they didn't get what they needed on the first try. And it wasn't efficient for them because they had to put in extra effort or try another channel or just leave. And oftentimes, if the channels weren't connected, the company didn't have context of whatever else the customer might have done. So then the customer has to repeat themselves, which again make customers very frustrated. So why was it so ineffective and inefficient? Let's say that they did try another channel, right? If you don't really have true omni-channel interactions and on the engagement channels that your customers prefer, and you can't stitch this all together with your interaction data and with AI, it's really difficult to deliver intelligent, accurate, contextually relevant, real-time answers that the customers need. And so many times when we talk to customers of brands, they say, you know what, this really isn't working for me. Excuse me. So let's look at the what I call the empathy continuum, or level of personalization through time. In the very beginning, we had call centers, right? Very focused on cost to serve. We started adding other interaction channels, and we looked at efficiency and effectiveness. Then we started to look at how do we start to engage, especially in digital channels. But these errors were based on these old definitions of efficiency and effectiveness that were really based on cost cutting as the business value driver. And they were limited because they were really using linear technologies. And so where we are today is what we call the empathy continuum, and it's a new paradigm of really being customer and employee centric. And what we find is this empathy factor, which I'll show you what that actually really means, is the opportunity to be able to use new kinds of technology so customers feel known, feel heard, feel understood, maybe even delighted. And as a result, you can drive more empathy, trust, and loyalty. And what's great is when you do this, it adds to the business value. So we are starting to see a shift from cost cutting to employee and customer loyalty and customer lifetime value. And if you start to look at what was the actual experience, so in the very beginning, in the old paradigm, you're really looking at company-centric cost cutting all the way to the right hand side, where you're looking at this new empathy era, where you really focus on the employee and the customer, you're focused on customer lifetime value and the brand promise. And what you can start to see is there's an exponential opportunity for not only for companies to start to really deliver more personalized experiences, but also drive better business value. So, what is empathy in action? In our definition, it really means that at every point in the customer journey, the company needs to listen, understand, act, and learn to be able to provide customers what they want and need and surprise them. Empathy is when companies really put themselves in the shoes of their customer and their employees, and they design experiences from the customer and the employee point of view. Now, if you look at the upper right-hand corner, I've basically taken that kind of empathy construct through time. And what we're seeing is companies wanting to move up and to the right. And part of that is what we call blind spots. So when you're in the lower quadrants of establishing and performing, oftentimes the experiences lead to a loss in brand reputation, customer retention, employee retention, and lower customer lifetime values. And so the goal is to remove these blind spots. And, I'm not saying that companies purposely weren't customer centric, but what I see through time is that technology really couldn't deliver on the promise. There were a lot of experts like Tom Peters and Don Peppers, and they were all saying, we need to be customer centric, we need to really deliver these great experiences. But truth be told, technology really couldn't deliver on this level of personalization at scale. And so as you start to integrate new kinds of technologies into your business, you're able to move a lot of the blind spots, evolve on this empathy continuum, increase your customer and employee satisfaction, increase your employee and customer retention, and actually do better by your business by increasing customer lifetime value, the revenue, and reducing costs. So that's kind of the goal of what we're going to talk about. So, empathy in action is really based on one of my favorite people in the world, the late Professor Clayton Christensen, Competing Against Luck. If you're not a fan already, I highly recommend some of his books. And in this particular book, he talks about the job to be done theory. And so his theory is that really there are two key components to any business, if you think about it. If you don't have customers and you don't have employees, you really can't run a successful business. And so when you start to think about it, it makes a lot of sense that you really want to focus on these two key components. What's interesting though, for the last 50 years in this industry, most of us have focused on what's really important to the company, their strategies, technologies, and processes. And so empathy in action is not fluffy, it's not training, it's not a mindset, it's not being nice, and it's not being altruistic, but it's about brands really putting themselves in the customer and the employee's shoes and re-examining the experiences that they deliver and transforming from a company-centric to a customer and employee-centric point of view. So what's the urgency? Why transform into this thing that we're coining the term empathy in action? Well, when companies can deliver these concrete actions to provide highly personalized customer and employee experiences, customers and employees feel heard, understood, and acknowledged. And this results in their trust and loyalty. And trust and loyalty actually results in a competitive advantage unlike any other, enhancing business performances. And when we study a lot of the companies that have done well in the last couple of years, this is really what they're doing. It also allows a company to increase their customer market share and their revenue. And it also helps to increase employee retention, productivity, their brain trust, and engagement. So how does this work? So let's take a look at this. So if I'm communicating with you and I start to talk to you and I'm listening and I'm really digesting what you're saying and I'm learning from what I'm saying, what that does is increase the trust and it increases our loyalty to one another. And in terms of the contact center, what we're looking at is we're looking at doing that with really personalized experiences. So how do you deliver, right? We're all in the contact center business. You need to be able to do this at scale. So how do you do this? Well, that's where technology comes into play. So it's really looking at your employee and customer data, artificial intelligence, and engagement. And when I talk to companies, they always say, well, I have all of these, right? So what are you saying that's really different? And the question I always get is, how do I get from the outside, right, my technology layer, to that inside layer, the empathy, trust, and loyalty that's really going to change my business model? So let's say we're having a conversation. The first thing that I would do is I would listen. You would tell me things, I would listen. Then I would start to think about what you said and I would understand and start to predict, okay, I bet this is, maybe my next best action. This is maybe the next thing that I could talk about that would be really important or interesting. And then after, we go through this a couple of times, I would want to listen and understand and predict and act, but I'd want to learn from all of that so that our relationship would get better. And what we found is that technology can now actually listen through the data layer, just like we do in personal conversations. It can understand and predict through artificial intelligence. It can act in various channels. And then it can take hundreds of thousands of interactions at scale and be able to look for patterns using AI and machine learning and be able to look at, how well are we doing? What's working? What's not working? And so basically what's really important and what's different today is this opportunity to be able to orchestrate all these systems of listening, of understanding and predicting, acting and learning, and do that at scale so that every single experience for every single employee and every single customer is actually personalized to the extent that it builds that trust and loyalty. The other thing to really consider here is who is at the center of the experience. So clearly, the customer, we've talked a lot about customer experience, and customers want you to be able to understand who you are, where you've been, what they've done, and what's the next best thing. But we also find that it's also really important. The other side of the coin is to also be able to do the same thing for employees. And if you are able to really improve the experience for the employee, oftentimes happy employees make happy customers. But we also found that if you do one without the other, then you don't get the same kind of exponential lift in your business that you could otherwise. So let's take, something from real life, because still everything's pretty theoretical. What does empathy, the lack of empathy, really feel like? So this is an example. My friend Manish, he was moving from Indianapolis to San Francisco, and you can see here he's actually logged on to the truck website, and he wants to rent a truck. So he's looked through all the trucks, he's in the shopping cart, he's picked something, and then he's like wondering, I don't know if I picked the right size truck. So what does Manish do? What do most of us do, right? We start to look around on the website and we look for frequently asked questions. We look for help. He looks through the FAQs. He's not really finding what he wants. He sees a chatbot and he logs on. But let's take a look at this chatbot. The chatbot, even though Manish is logged in, chatbot doesn't know who he is, doesn't know what he's done, doesn't know what's in his shopping cart, doesn't know that he's looking at FAQs and probably has a question about the size of the truck. So there's no context for that chatbot to be able to respond to him in a really intelligent and concise way. And oftentimes when customers are really, they want to do something quickly, they don't want to have to repeat themselves. And so now having them fill in all these fields is frustrating. So what we would call that is not listening. So what does empathy look like? Let's take a look at that. So now Manish is on the website. He's found a truck. He's put it in a shopping cart. And in the background, through the data and AI layer on the channels, there are systems of understanding and prediction. So it's listening through the customer data, it's listening through the channel, and it's actually understanding and predicting what Manish is doing and what he really wants. So now when the chatbot greets him, the chatbot knows his name, says, "Hi, I see you're moving from Indianapolis to San Francisco and you have a 10-foot truck." So you can start to see the level of richness and data and information in the experience. And so that chatbot is now very intelligent and is actually helping Manish accomplish what he needs to accomplish. At some point, the chatbot, and you always want to figure out at what point do you transition, because sometimes the chatbot can handle things and they can take care of it very quickly and easily and with little customer effort. And sometimes people need to talk to a teammate. So let's see what happens when the chatbot transfers that to an agent. With all of that context, what's really great is now the chat is much more intelligent. So she can say, "Hey Manish, I see that you're considering, the size of truck. Let's talk about the truck. And then, you know what? We also have movers and boxes and insurance." And so, he says, "I hadn't really thought about insurance, but that would be really great. So if you can tell me a little bit more about that, that would be great." And she also reminds him that they have relationships with hotels and restaurants. So as he's going through this experience of moving cross country, not only is the customer getting what they need, the information on the truck, other things that they might need, but it's the agent is helping them turn it into a really cool experience, cross brand experience with interconnected journeys and experiences. And this is another opportunity for a company to start to increase revenue in new ways they hadn't before. So this is when we talk about systems of action, this is what we really mean. Um, on the backside, the agent has access to back office experts and to knowledge, as well as gamifications, which helps with work satisfaction and agent retention. So you can start to see at the same time that we're creating a really great experience for the customer, we're really looking at creating a great experience also for the agent. So this last piece is systems of learning. It's really taking hundreds of thousands of interactions that happen daily, and instead of waiting a month for the business analyst to be able to go through and look at patterns, it's really looking at real-time patterns to see what's working, what's not working, and making improvements to the business and to the experiences so that you're really getting the return on your investment. Technology is, I can't emphasize this more. I really highly recommend that book, Bold. Technology is exponential, but humans are not. And what's interesting is when you step 6 linear steps, you get 6 linear paces from where you began, but 6 exponential steps get you 32 paces from where you started. So that's part of why it's going so fast. Why is AI so critical? Why is it a competitive advantage? Well, in the old paradigm, companies relied on humans. And to meet these increasing demands, companies hired more agents, which got really expensive. And that's kind of, I think, where the self-service industry came up with. But again, as we looked at the self-service industry up until now, while it was really good in concept and it was fantastic for the points in time when we had it, it really often didn't provide a highly useful answer. So in this next evolution of technology, where the world is going now, using exponential technologies, we're not really relying on the intelligence of just people, but we're actually augmenting human capacity with AI. And when we talk to agents, you know, in the very beginning of AI and agents, there was, people were worried that their jobs were going to be taken. And as with any new technology advancement, there are changes to the future of work, right? But what we found when we interviewed agents is that they actually love it because they're not having to do the mundane tasks of resetting passwords. Technology is handling that, and they're able to use their personal skills to really solve customers' problems. So the cognitive power of AI exceeds the ability of human to listen, to understand, act, and learn, and allows us to provide more empathetic employee and customer experiences. And this results in a new kind of efficiency and effectiveness that gets customers what they need and want. And that's really what we think empathy in action is really all about. These concierge type personalized experiences aren't fluffy. In fact, they're actually why customers are reaching out to companies. It's things like, show me that you know me before you even meet me. Present me with the answers I want and ones I didn't even know I want. Don't ask me to repeat myself. Allow me to, to help me before I even know I have a problem. Check in with me and make sure it worked all out. And above all, keep my data safe. So that's really the experience as a service, being able to combine technology and really make it a more human, empathetic experience is really what we're looking at. And a lot of customer and employee experiences have been saying this is what companies should do. But honestly, up until now, technology has not been able to deliver experiences like this. And so it's a pretty cool time to be in the contact center CRM world. So when it all comes together, businesses can deliver better experiences and at the same time grow their business. And that's it.
Thank you, Natalie. It was a great presentation. Team, do you have any questions?
Sorry.
Very interesting. Thank you, Natalie.
You're welcome.
Thanks a lot.
Any questions?
Thank you. I just have
anything you guys are struggling with, anything and perspectives. I'd love feedback on the presentation because it's, it's interesting for me to see how other people are thinking about these same things.
I just have a quick question, please. When we're talking in like integrating, using the technology to better serve the customers and integrating them together, sometimes like in the example that you were talking about with the chatbot and so, the main challenge is that it takes a lot of time to get something like that with this algorithm or with this type of experience into the market and to start. And usually when we introduce a new solution or something, it takes time to pick up and it takes time to for the customer to understand it and so on. Is there something that can be done to like have a workaround around that, be faster to the market, or in not necessarily in getting the product into the market, but more of the adoption phase with the customer? Because usually this is a challenge that we face when we come to introduce a new technology or something in the market that people are not really aware of or something like that.
Yes, so you're absolutely right. That's a really good question. There is an adoption phase, and part of what I've seen in the past, having been an analyst at Forrester, I analyzed probably 60 CRM vendors every year to do a customer service wave. And what we found was part of the adoption issue is an education issue, but it's also a frustration issue. So when we, and I mean a collective we, myself included, when we were talking, about implementing bots that weren't very smart, what often happens is that the people who are willing to try it, so Geoffrey Moore is another, if you haven't read his stuff, Geoffrey Moore, he does the technology adoption curve. And there's the innovators and early adopters who are willing to try anything, right? And what you want to really look at is when you implement something like this, is what is that ease of using that technology, right? So is the user interface, have they used design thinking? Is it really easy and interesting to be able to use? And can you get those early innovators and early adopters to use it? If you've designed it well, if it's actually being orchestrated well, if the data and the AI are able, like a lot of times when you add like a chat bot and you're adding AI, there's like this whole big gigantic training data set that you need to do. And so where technology is now, depending on what you pick, it's much faster to get it set up and actually working really well. And so when you get those innovators and early adopters to use it, the word of mouth travels very fast. And what happens is customers talk to other customers, and they, once you get people using it, they teach each other how to use it. And then you start to see, and maybe even you have a demo. But what we're seeing is when the tech, it's really a lot of that adoption has to do with whether the technology, the level of customer effort, and if it's difficult, if it's not very smart, you know, what I call the dumb bot, you won't get the adoption. I mean, it just, sometimes it never takes off. Sometimes it takes forever to take off. So what's really cool about the new kinds of technologies and how they're orchestrated, and in particular, I'll talk about Genesis for a second. What we do is we look at all the technology that you have in your contact center, and we're able to orchestrate everything together so that you're not doing point solutions. And I think that's really different. It's a different strategy than trying to get this thing to work and this thing to work and this thing to work, and they're all working independently. The synergy, that circle that had the dots that populated around all the data in the channels and AI, that ability to orchestrate experiences is really important, because now all your systems are firing together, and you're really giving it the opportunity to be able to provide the kind of experiences customers are looking for, the opportunity to really create that kind of word of mouth. And I know myself as a customer, right? If I go on somebody's website and I try something and it doesn't work, I'll never try it again. And so there goes your adoption, there goes all the money that you just spent. But if it works, I would prefer to use an intelligent chatbot than to call a contact center. And that's, you know, just think about yourself as a customer and your experience with technology. And what I find is if it works, I use it. If it doesn't work, I don't try it again, and often I'll go to a competitor. Does that help?
Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? So, Natalie, I have a question. How do you see if the COVID bring any new challenges to the customer experience, or do you see like any new shifts in the customer experience for the future?
Huge shifts. So one of the things that happened to Genesis, and you know, obviously we're a contact center vendor, and one of the things that we were really worried about was we sell to companies who often have between 20 and 2,000 people in a room. And obviously with with COVID, you can't have people in a room. And so what we did at the beginning of the pandemic is we actually offered our cloud solution for free for 2 months, just because it was the right thing to do. And we knew companies, you know, customers were going to have questions. And so what we were able to do is stand up a contact center in 48 hours using that experience as a service, the circle with the orchestration, and help be able to, you know, because people would just call with questions, you know, people were ordering online because they didn't want to go, they couldn't or didn't want to go to the grocery store, they didn't want to go to get medicine or whatever they needed. And what actually happened was a lot of those customers ended up seeing the ease of use and how providing better experiences actually helped their business. And so a lot of those customers actually became full-time customers for Genesis. And what that taught us was that when you provide really easy to use experiences, customers and agents really appreciate it. I think the other thing, if you look at the companies that are doing well and the companies that are not doing well during this pandemic, if there was anything that was that good that came out of it, I mean, I think there were some good things that did come out of it. We all got to spend a little bit more time with our families. You know, some of the other things that happened are really saddening. I think part of what has happened for business, though, is a huge shift in the need to be customer centric, a huge shift in being able to provide better customer experiences, because people aren't going into stores. People, either for health reasons or because, they don't want to be exposed, don't want to take a chance. And so this push to being online, this push to being able to have customer experiences in new channels, is really forcing a lot of companies to relook at their business model and relook at how they're delivering those experiences. And if you use the old technology, it's going to take you a long time to get that set up and get that working and get customer adoption. And so, because the pandemic is really a forcing function to be able to think about, kind of that OODA loop, how quickly can we do something? Is it going to take us like 2 years to implement something? Well, in the last year and months, we really didn't know. There wasn't any business that really had that much time to really rethink, um, how they do business. And so it meant that you had to do that OODA loop really, really quickly. And you really needed to be more customer centric, and you really needed to be more employee centric. So the future of work, we see the future of work really changing. We see the future of customer experience really changing. And I don't think it's going to, even though many countries are getting the vaccine and many countries are getting their numbers down, we don't see that customer experience changing, because now customers are becoming accustomed to using channels they've never used before. And a lot of people learned how to shop online. They're younger demographics who we would call digital natives, who were already there. But I know my grandma, who had never bought anything from retailers online. She called me up and she said, okay, this Zoom thing, I want to do a Zoom call with you. And I want you to show me, how do I order something from Costco, which is a big retailer here. And so if my grandma was asking me, I was like, wow, that's a really interesting trend. So I think that, there are a lot of things that happen in history. The evolution of digital and exponential technologies is a forcing function. The pandemic has been a forcing function. And I think one of the things that's happened, if you look at a cell phone, the cell phone probably has about $1 million worth of old businesses, everything from GPS to Kindles to a phone. So there's all these different businesses that used to be separate businesses, that when the cell phone or the smartphone got invented, they're all apps on our phones. So when you see digital and exponential technologies evolving, it's really transforming businesses and making them, presenting them in different forms. And so I think that's where the competitive advantage is. It's also where you can lose your market share if you're not really paying attention to what's, the forcing functions that are really beyond and out of our individual control.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
And we have 2 minutes left. Any final questions from the team? Okay, I think we are all good. Thank you very much. Thank you for a great presentation, and everyone have a good day.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.